I'm pleased to welcome my special guest, Dr. Simone Gold. She is a medical doctor and also a Juris Doctor as well. She graduated from Chicago Medical School, earned a Juris Doctorate degree from Stanford University Law School. You have served in a number of minority communities as ER doctor for over 20 years. You've also worked in Washington, D.C. for the Surgeon General, as well as for the chairman of the U.S. Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee. You're also the founder of America's Frontline Doctors and now founder and CEO of Gold Care at goldcare.com. You have a long credentials. I don't have time to go through everything, but welcome to Freedom Alive, Dr. Gold.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Matt.
You have become well known because of COVID. I remember the time when you went to Washington, D.C., and you led a press conference in Washington, D.C. during the height of COVID, and you were there with other medical physicians from around the country, speaking common sense and truth to the nation with regards to the issues involving COVID. What brought you to the point where you got involved in that issue?
I was working as an emergency physician for more than 20 years, and what I was seeing on the ground in 2020 did not match either my education or my real-time experience with COVID. The government coronavirus task force meetings and the media were saying things that were objectively false based on reading the research and based upon my direct experience with patients. And when I couldn't get enough people in the media to kind of push back on this, I said, we doctors have to talk directly to the American people and let them know the truth as it really existed, which is that lockdowns didn't work. Paper masks don't keep out respiratory viruses, and early treatment's available should you need it. That was our message, and it definitely upended the system.
It certainly did upend the system. So how is it that somebody like yourself, I've known you now from that time on and saw you in so many different leading roles, how is it that somebody like you could see through the medical morass, if you will, and the propaganda that we were experiencing? But so many other doctors didn't. They just went along with the process. And they used the same old talking points without doing independent research. What's the difference? Why did we see what we saw?
That is the heart of the matter. It is the incredibly important question. I think there's a combination. Human beings in general, I think, tend to just follow a little bit like a herd. I mean, they say the pastor has his flock. I do think people have a bit of a sheep-like quality. Now, that should speak more to lay people than to doctors, but doctors also are following their own paychecks. In my lifetime, doctors have gone from being self-employed small business owners to becoming employees. I think that massively contributed. I think the fear of cancel culture, which is essentially just your reputational damage, has become so exacerbated and magnified in a way that our ancestors wouldn't even recognize. I mean, people's whole lives can be destroyed if other people in the public space harm their reputation. So fear of cancel culture is a big one. And I do think in general, we've all learned that most people are not willing to be the first to stick their neck out. So I think those are the major reasons. And I just want to add, because I know you're such a strong person of faith, that the people who stood up, whether they were doctors or lawyers or lay people, overwhelmingly were people of faith, overwhelmingly.
Yeah, that's an interesting indication. That's true. There were people of faith that didn't stand up, but there's overwhelmingly number of people that had faith that did stand up to this political pressure.
I just want to share with you that it wasn't even clear to me in the beginning that faith is actually what drove me. In fact, I think we have a mutual friend, Robert Tyler, who asked me one day why I was fighting like this. And I said, well, I'm just a doctor and I want to save lives. And he's the one who taught me about myself. He said, no, I think this is a religious calling for you. And I realized in that moment he was right, that I found it offensive to God's law to be treating human beings like this, like they were so expendable. What, because it was your mom, or, not the politician's mom? They're allowed to be abused in the nursing home. We all saw what Rachel Levine did when he was the Secretary of Health for his state of Pennsylvania. Yeah. And he made a rule that people could not take their loved ones out of nursing home facilities. Then he took his own mother out. Yeah. And so I was just offended. So I do think that there were good people and bad people on both sides, but overwhelmingly the people who were less afraid to speak up were people of faith.
Yeah, I agree. Now, one of the things you mentioned is that sometimes these doctors, they've gone from being self-employed where they have their individual practice to now they're bought up by these mega hospitals that have taken over the healthcare industry. Like, for example, in Central Florida, we have basically primarily 2 hospitals, and so many doctors are part of one system or the other. So they refer within the system. They're not independent. Those hospitals, whenever they were in the COVID situation, they would get money for diagnosing somebody with COVID, and they wouldn't get money if they didn't diagnose. So therefore, they directed the doctors to do the same thing. How do we break that monopoly within healthcare?
Okay, this is incredibly important. People have to distinguish in their mind the concept of insurance from true healthcare. There's all these systems out there. I call it legacy healthcare, medical industrial complex. There are these systems out there, and we've all been part of those systems. We buy insurance, we give insurance to our doctors, all of that stuff. That's over here in pile number 1. And pile number 2 is your actual health and wellness. For your actual health and wellness, you need access to good information and truth-telling doctors. That is separate from being in the system. Now, can we get rid of the system immediately? No, we cannot. It's very big. It's overwhelming. It's around us, Medicare, hospital systems, et cetera. But you can navigate the system successfully if you have a truth-telling advisor by your side or you have access to good, unbiased information. That is literally why I built Gold Care, not to break the system. We're too small. We can't go up against that, but we can help patients, for example, Medicare patients or self-employed patients or people with no insurance, navigate the system much better. All they really need is access to unbiased information and truth-telling doctors who are only motivated to help the person in front of them. That's the answer. It's the 2 very dangerous places we saw very clearly during COVID. The choke points were hospitals and schools. Yeah. Hospitals and schools. A lot of people know you got to take your kids out of government schools. To the extent you can take yourself out of the government legacy system, you should. Doesn't mean you always can. Sometimes you need surgery. Sometimes you need a hospital. But we teach you how to navigate it successfully.
It seems as though, a lot of doctors, they just prescribe you medications. They don't tell you the interaction between one medication and the next. And they don't look at anything as an alternative treatment like health and supplements. And that was one of the big things during COVID. You never heard about vitamins and supplements or other repurposed medications like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and so forth from the traditional medical model. And that came from doctors like yourself. Why is it that doctors coming out of medical school are so myopic and really they don't learn about alternative treatments like what you are engaged in addition to traditional medicine, until after they're out of medical school?
Yeah, it is interesting. The doctors who mostly spoke up were really mid-career. They weren't young, they weren't old. Mm-hmm. It was very noticeable. You needed experience and wisdom that you gain for a while. The system is absolutely rigged to push drugs. And it's heartbreaking a little bit to say that because I do appreciate excellent pharmaceuticals. They certainly can be life-saving. Mm-hmm. So I'm not against that. I'm against the overuse, and I'm against the medicalization of ordinary medical conditions. We treat sadness or anxiety as a condition that needs to be medicated. We have gone down the wrong path when it comes to treating or trying to avoid like heart attack or the coronary artery disease. We've kind of gone down a financially lucrative path instead of another path. Same thing with diabetes. The system is geared towards 15-minute consults, of which 8 of those minutes are spent documenting. Mm-hmm. And the only solution in that short time frame really is to refer you to a specialist, refer you to a test, or give you a prescription. That has to stop. That is fundamentally what's wrong. What has to happen is the doctor and the patient have to talk to each other, and the patient has to explain himself, and the doctor has to give solid information without any other incentive.
It's so refreshing because, insurance, the 2 big driving things, it seems as though, obviously medical schools teaching a certain model, which is not anything to do with alternative treatment other than the traditional medicines. And then you've got the insurance, which is controlling essentially healthcare decisions by doctors. And then you have these centralized medical complexes with regards to the hospitals that are buying up all the different facilities and conglomerating and then employing all the doctors that otherwise were in private practice. But I think we're in a new day, and I'm hopeful that the future is going to change.
Matt, I'm right there with you. I'm actually very optimistic. People just have to come find the alternative solutions. We have them in the banking space. We have them in the education space. Now we have them in the medical space. You just have to kind of open your mind and realize we're at like a tipping point, a transition point for most Americans to think through, why am I doing it this way? And is there a better way to do this? And there's a better way, certainly in the medical space.
Well, one of the areas I think where sometimes we've seen this both in counseling and in other areas, we see it in law as well, but in medicine, you've got this political ideology that clouds medical science decisions. And one of those clear areas, obviously we experienced it in COVID. Different kinds of agendas, they superseded real science, and they literally undermined what real science was saying. But in the context of the so-called gender ideology, you see the same thing. I mean, it makes no sense what we're seeing in some of the gender ideology issues with regards to what's happening within the medical field. I know the pendulum is swinging perhaps the other way, but what's your take on what's going on in the medical field, counseling, but particularly medicine, with regards to gender ideology?
Yes, so the gender ideology movement is put forth by medical gender activists, some of whom happen to have medical degrees, some of whom happen to have nursing degrees. That's it. When you look at the history of it, it's been hijacked by activists. The leaders in that movement, many of them have this kind of ideological issue in their own life, or you could say disease or dysphoria in their own life, and then they've spread it out to a lot of people. One of the greatest blessings of the change in political structure in Washington, D.C., is that we no longer have to pretend facts are not facts. Yeah. There are two sexes. That is it. Male and female. He created them. That's all there will ever be. To be clear, there are rare instances of people born, very rare, maybe 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 20,000, with a chromosomal abnormality that's XXY or XX. X rare. That is not what we're talking about, and is not what the gender ideologists are talking about. That is a rare situation that doctors can deal with. This has been a social contagion that was being run by people with their own dysphoria, people like Rachel Levine, who were encouraging mutilating surgeries on healthy bodies. Not only were they not helping the people with the thoughts in their head and the concurrent depression, anxiety, autism, which was in the majority of cases of children being treated, but they were then mutilating healthy bodies. The tide has absolutely turned on that. I hope it turns ferociously. These doctors need to be put in jail for mutilating children. Matt, I probably feel more strongly about this than you do, but they have taken children and robbed them of their birthright. Yeah. They've made them impossible to have children, impossible to breastfeed with a permanently disfigured body. That requires prison time, in my opinion. And that, by the way, will stop the doctor's financial interest in offering these procedures.
Dr. Gold, I'm 100% with you. I think some of these people need to go to prison. There's a doctor down in South Florida. I don't know if she's still doing what she's doing now, but her nickname that she did herself is Dr. Titus Deletus. And she has smiley faces if she's done a certain number of total mastectomies in a week of teen girls, and frowny faces if she only did a few of those a week. And she's on TikTok, and she has several 100,000 viewers, and she promotes this as though this is the panacea. And here's the real thing that just makes me angry, is that these girls or guys, in her case, it's all girls primarily that are coming to her for these mutilating surgeries, they have real issues going on. They have anxiety. They may have something of the autism spectrum. They have depression. They have body image issues. They have issues, and they're seeking help from a professional. And they are happy whenever they hear, I've got the fix for you. Mm-hmm. I'll give you these drugs, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and then we'll go through surgery because you just were born in the wrong body. And that person believes that lie. Dr. Gold, you have, as part of America's Frontline Doctors, led in so many different areas, but you also have some cases that you've worked on as well, both as experts and other issues that are part of your mission. And you have a case that has just been accepted by review for the United States Supreme Court.
Yes. I mean, you and I have overlapped a lot. You know, you've been in this fight for religious liberty for many years now. And I came more recently through the lens, through the pathway of medical freedom, but it often touches on, in my opinion, religious issues. So we did become known during COVID for putting up a lot of litigation, protest vaccine mandates in honor of a person's right to make those decisions over their own body. We've now also gotten into other cases like you. We filed an amicus brief in Scrimeti to ensure the state doesn't, the state has the right, not the federal government, to say, if medical mutilation surgeries are permitted or not. Of course, they should not be permitted. But we're in other issues as well. We are focused, I guess, on two areas. One are these transgender medical mutilation surgeries. Another is physician consent laws. Physician censorship laws. There's a lot of states across the nation where the state medical boards are trying or have tried to restrict doctors' license based on free speech. Yeah. So we jumped into that. And I guess I did leave that on the first. On the transgender, we're very much in the parental consent and parental rights category. So the case that was just accepted by CERT just a couple of days ago, Childs versus Salazar, and this is essentially parental rights in the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado is essentially saying that parents don't have the right to decide if their child can be socially, quote, transitioned without the parents' knowledge. In other words, do we live in a communist or fascist nation where the government gets to do things to your child without the parents' knowledge or consent, or do we live in the free country of America? That is what's at stake at Childs versus Salazar. Super glad that we were accepted on cert at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we've been litigating on that area since 2012. We litigated the very first case that came out of California, and then also the New Jersey, and we won two cases at the Court of Appeals in the 11th Circuit for Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. But that particular case is very critical for doctors and counselors because that's a case in which Colorado is telling counselors that they can only affirm, quote unquote, affirm somebody in their confused gender ideology, but they can't help someone who wants to be helped overcome unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender confusion. And I always say that counselors are kind of like a GPS. The client selects the destination. The counselor or the doctor tries to help them reach that objective. But in those particular states like Colorado, the GPS, every time you say, I want to overcome these unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender confusion, the GPS puts you in the exact opposite direction and says, no, you can't do that. You just have to accept it. Change your moral, your religious values. That's who you are, and that's how you're going to be. And those laws are very, very dangerous. So I am glad the Supreme Court is taking this case, and I suspect all these laws that ban this kind of counseling nationally will be struck down, and we'll have freedom in the counseling session.
I have a couple of problems with this. Again, I'm a doctor and a lawyer, and there's a lot of things wrong with, as you've described. One of them is the concept of viewpoint discrimination.
Yeah,
Our nation is not allowed, the powers that be are not allowed to engage in viewpoint discrimination. You have free speech in all areas. You don't just have speech in the acceptable areas. That is viewpoint discrimination. The government is not allowed to engage in that. And they're clearly doing that. The other thing that really bothers me as a doctor lawyer, in the case of these gender cases, they're actually stopping the treatment. The vast majority of children, if you leave them alone and do not medically intervene with a scalpel or harsh prescription medications that are contrary to how the body works, will actually resolve these issues. Yeah. And you're actually interfering with the cure. I find that's right. Very troubling. So,
yeah, 85+% or more, depending upon whether you're male or female, resolve naturally with no intervention. So if you have a child that goes to a doctor or a counselor and they say, oh, I know what the problem is. You were born in the wrong body. Let's put you on these drugs and let's mutilate your body and take off some of your body parts. But naturally, that person is going to progress so that they're going to be very comfortable with how God made them as male or female if that person didn't give them the bad advice. And yet that's exactly what Colorado's law says you must do. Give them bad advice and only the government's advice, not having medical freedom. So this is a great decision that the Supreme Court is taking this case, and I am hopeful that these laws will be struck down nationally.
And I just want to encourage you, your team, your viewers, to think of AFLDS, America's Frontline Doctors, as a medical civil liberties organization that wants to come alongside people like yourself who are fighting for religious freedom. We're fighting essentially for medical freedom, but it does often touch on your religious liberties. So we are there to stand alongside people like yourself who've been doing it for decades.
Tell us, for the viewers, what is available that someone can find when they go to America's Frontline Doctors. I know during COVID it was very valuable to get information, medical information you couldn't get anyplace else, and get in touch with telemed doctors that were able to prescribe you life-saving treatment that was not available from the traditional hospitals. What can they find there? I know you also have written materials. You've written a book as well.
There's a couple of things. First of all, just sign up. All we do is send you occasional emails. And there's no cost. And when you do, the emails every week are filled with kind of the latest information on medical freedom issues that are going on. You know, is Fauci ever going to prison is a big question we get all the time. You know, what's happening in the transgender space, and, you know, what's happening with Secretary Kennedy, you know, in the MAHA movement. So those are the kind of emails we send out. Another big thing that we do is we have daily dose videos, which I don't even think you know about, Matt. But one of our doctors does these, we call them daily dose. We do them about 3 or 4 times a week. And he has a 3 or 4 minute video on just like a cool, hot topic. Those videos are fantastic. So you also get those on aflds.org. So it's just a resource for everybody. It's nobody really does the kind of content that we do, which is very like medical freedom specific. And we just welcome everybody, aflds.org.
Well, that's one of the benefits of COVID. I mean, there were some things that came out of COVID that were actually beneficial. We learned a lot. And one of them is what you're doing on the cutting edge of medical freedom. Whoever thought that we would have needed medical freedom, but COVID certainly showed us that we do. And right now, with RFK Jr. there in the cabinet as the head of HHS, there's a lot of things to talk about, both in the big pharma arena as well as in just food substances and making our food healthy again.
You know, I just want to comment on that specifically. So, right, there's 2 things. There's the drugs like the FDA and CDC and NIH and the research. And then there's, of course, agriculture, like what are we putting into our foods? Native peoples have always known that food is medicine, medicine is food. It's very important to naturopathic doctors that we treat food with the respect that we haven't treated it. That's one thing. But as a doctor, I also want to point out, people got pretty upset with Kennedy because he had done that editorial about the vaccines, the MMR vaccines. But if you read the article, I think the headline was perhaps written by somebody other than Kennedy. If you read the article, in the article, he said that the vast majority of measles cases have been resolved long before the measles MMR shot was put out to the public, which is true. And then he also advocated for vitamin A, because if you had low vitamin A levels, you did poorly. So I think the criticism of him was quite rushed. It's give the man a chance. He's literally putting on in front of the nation and the world things that we hadn't heard before from HHS, which is, oh my goodness, the incidence of the disease had already plummeted before the shot was released, and you need to have good levels of vitamin A. I don't think, Dr. Gold, I've ever heard from the CDC or the HHS that we need to take vitamins and supplements until it came out with his op-ed. Yes, correct. And so that's what I'm bringing it up because people have been a little critical. I said, but look at how different it is. Like he pointed out that the numbers had already plummeted before the shots, which was historically true. And he pointed out that low vitamin A levels are a problem if you get measles. So listen, I'm excited. I'm excited for the future about MAHA and, just the fact that Americans now, I think, are going to be able to get more solid, accurate information a little bit more easily.
Absolutely. So you've got a lot of information there. AmericasFrontlineDoctors.org. That's AFLDS.org, AFLDS.org. Dr. Simone Gold is our special guest. Thank you so much for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Thank you so much.